Hey everyone, I just wanted to say this before video gets started because I know it's a pretty long video. You might not get to the end where I do say this, but I wanted to give you all some homework, which is basically a contest. Moreover, more than homework, it's a contest. Yeah. So the basics of the contest is that there's 3 challenges. And I want you all to go out and do one of the challenges. And the winner of each challenge, I'm going to go ahead and feature on a video in my channel. And if they have YouTube or whatever they're advertising in the description of the dream that they send me in dreams, I'm going to go ahead and feature on the channel as well in that video. So, yeah, if you're interested in that, the challenges, they are basically, 1, I want you to make an enemy that jumps and gets scared and runs away when it sees the player, and it has to be animated. 2 is make an enemy that only moves when the player isn't looking at it, and have it kill the player somehow when it's in range and you look at it. 3 would be make your player have a superpower of any kind, and it must be usable against enemies, or have it kill a puppet, or something like that. Yeah, I hope you all make submissions. Now let's get to the video. Hello everyone! In this good game design video, we're going to be going over some logic theory, or how to solve problems with logic, basically. Now, some of you still ask me some very basic things in terms of logic, as in, how do I connect wires? What's a signal? What's a binary value? Yada yada yada. Well, if you still have questions that are like that, I highly suggest that you watch and or play the Media Molecule tutorials, as they will help you a lot more than this video will. And also, it will help you understand more of my videos and tutorials that you can watch, as well as this one. And this video specifically is more over how to make logic independently from tutorials, like how to make your own things in the game without relying on other people and just on your own. So let's get started. So logic is inherently mathematical. As you can see here, we got like a calculator, and also most logic outputs a signal of some kind that can usually be classified by a number or binary value. So for example, a NOT gate, that's going to go ahead and output a binary value of either 1 or 0 most of the time, unless you hook up a non-binary thing to it. For example, a value slider has a non-binary value, but it's still a number, and in fact you can increase the number. So we're going to hook that up, and you can see that if I go ahead and extend the decimal placement, we should get basically the opposite of this. And yeah, so logic is inherently mathematical, really. It's got to do a lot with numbers, as well as if statements, basically on or off stuff. So basically, if you've had a hard time with math in school, then maybe logic isn't entirely for you, but hopefully this video will help explain some of the aspects of that, and you'll be able to understand as best as possible. But logic at its very core is asking a lot of yes or no questions. And if you have experience with programming, you could consider it basically as a bunch of if statements, a bunch of questions, basically. When making things with logic, you generally want to plan out how and what you want the object to do. Specifically, you want to do what first, and then how you want it to do that thing. For example, if I want to make a light switch that turns on and off, I want to know if it's on or off, and I also want a way to turn this switch on or off if I'm the player, for example. Another example would be a UFO, and you know that you want to control the UFO, you want to move the UFO, maybe give it an abduction beam that can suck things up, for example. So these are all things that you want to understand when you're building with logic. You want to have a goal in mind. You don't want to just start like planning gameplay and not knowing like what exactly is going to be done. You want to have it mapped out, not precisely, but very well in your mind. You want to know exactly what's going to be made, and you also want to come up with ideas of how that can be done. Now, what I gave were some pretty simple examples, but what I'm really getting at is when you make things with logic, you want to ask yourself what and how, really. So a lot of this is actually just understanding what the logic gadgets are and what they do, and experimenting a lot. For example, if you want to suck things up with a tractor beam and a UFO, you'll probably say, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, let's see, there's a lot of ways you can do it, actually. There's a few ways that you can do it with just some basic gadgets, or you could do it with other more advanced methods with detecting things and transmitting values, but you usually want to go with the simplest option because that will usually work for you unless you have some special setup. So let's ask ourselves the question, what would a tractor beam do? What does that really do? Well, tractor beam moves and pulls something up. It applies a force to an object to pull it up. Well, you can either have it so if the object knows that it's in the tractor beam, then you could move it up with a mover like this that moves the object up. Or you can also just have the tractor beam suck things up as if it were a vacuum by applying a force to it, which you can use force applier right here. And you could do, instead of radial, directional, and you could change this shape to like a cylinder or maybe even a cone to get that shape that you want of a tractor beam. And basically you would have this go up, so it's applying an upwards force to basically pull on something. And you just play those settings until you get a result you want. So if we go ahead and drop in a puppet in here, you can see that puppet was slowed, but can also be pushed up like that. So it's basically being pulled. It is pushing, but we can also pull, I believe. I'm not really sure what the difference is. I think it just reverses it, yeah. Basically. It could have some physical differences that I'm not aware of, but yeah, that's basically what I mean, is you want to understand what the actual gadgets you have at your disposal do, and once you have an understanding of these, you can basically build whatever you want by asking the questions what, how, and if, basically. Now, that UFO thing was a pretty simple example, but I do have something already built that I have done a video on that we can use. Specifically, we're going to go ahead and head on over to my grappling hook scene. This one right here. And I'm going to do my best to walk through the stages of how I design this in my head, as well as basically what, how, and if the steps that I used, basically. So first we need to know what a grappling hook is, because when you say you want a grappling hook, there's a few different ideas that come to mind. You can have a grappling hook that can literally just shoot from the player from where they're aiming and attached to anything in the scene. You can have it only attached to ledges. You can only have it attached to points. And in this example, I have it only attached to this grapple spot right here. So let's walk through the steps of what a grappling hook actually does. Or if we were to prototype this, basically, what would we need to ask the logic to do and ask for this to happen? Well, we want to know if the player is pressing the aim button. And if the player is pressing the aim button, then we turn on a camera, basically, and let them see. And then we want to know, so 2 would be if we we want the player to be able to manipulate the view, probably with the right stick, when they're aiming, only when they're aiming. Well, of course you can manipulate the view normally, but we want this specific view that we're making for the aim, which is right here. This one right here, we only want to move it around when you are aiming. Next, so step 3, if we're aiming, if the player is aiming and we press the fire button, then we want to make something animate from the player to the spot we aimed at to show that the player actually fired like a grappling hook or something. And once the hook reaches the destination, which is this spot right here, most of the time, I mean, you can miss your aim, but once the hook reaches this destination, we want the hook to let the player know that it's there, so that the player can go to the hook spot, like animate to this spot. And then once the player reaches that point, we're going to go ahead and let the player drop down. If you were to do, for example, ledges, you might want to have it instead animate the player, or some other stuff like that. And next, we basically want to, again, understand how we're going to achieve this. And how we're going to achieve this is with logic. And basically, with logic, you need the experience to understand what these gadgets do. And the best way to get that experience is to just experiment and dig around to see what these do. Just pull stuff out and, you know, open up the properties, see what these settings do, see what it outputs. Don't ask other people, like, okay, but what does a calculator do? Well, calculator, if you open it up, you can see it takes A and B, and it applies this function to them. So you can change the function, and then that changes the output here, the result, basically. And only thing that's pretty advanced that has a hard time with some people is the signal manipulator. I mean, this is pretty crazy. But in reality, if you play with it enough, you'll understand it. I didn't understand it at first, even. I didn't ask other people what it was. I just went in and played with it, see what it did to signals and what it did to just inputs and outputs, what it outputted, and I began to understand it. So if you don't have really the time to go in and mess with every single one of these, then I would suggest either watching and playing more of the Media Molecule tutorials, or Jimmy Jules has tutorials specifically on individual gadgets, and he makes great videos, so I'd suggest watching that, watching those. But once you understand what these gadgets do, you can go ahead and try to apply them in your own way. And a lot of you, if you've watched my tutorials and actually went out and made things that you're instead of using the templates that I share, and you went out and make the thing itself, you can probably have some understanding of what these do. And once you have an understanding of what these do, you can go ahead and come up with a way of how these tools would work and how you would make things with it. So let's go ahead and run through how I made this grappling hook, basically. The basic steps. This may not be 100% accurate to the actual logic itself, because it's moreover like coming up with an idea and then building it along the way. So this idea of the grappling hook, it has a lot of different parts, so it's basically a lot of different things to think through and come up with for ideas. As you can see, I'm going to get all the pieces together so it's easier to examine. But first of all, since we know we're going to go ahead and need the player input, we want to make sure we have a controller sensor here, because that's where we're going to get all the signals from, basically, to start with. Next, we can use a few things to tell if the aim is pressed, which is what we want to know to activate the new view for the aim. And most of the time, you're probably going to use a trigger instead of a button. Now, buttons generate a full signal, and a full signal is the signal that is required to turn something completely on. So for example, if I were to get out the not gate again, a full signal isn't going to completely make this turn off. Like if I get that number display again as well, turn up the decimal places, and hook up the not output to the number range and the value slider to our not gate, you can see that it's not giving a full signal when we do 0.5. So now it's halfway on and halfway off. A full signal is what it's required to be like completely on. So if I were to hook up just this value slider to this, you can see that the higher the number that we input, the brighter that gadget becomes. But it doesn't go past 1, because the full signal for something to be turned on is 1. So full signal is 1. Now, with that in mind, a trigger, L2 or R2, actually outputs a 0 to 1 value, not 0 or 1. For example, if I were to press the triangle button like so, like that, then it outputs 1. But trigger can go 0 to 1. Like 50 would be 0.5, 55 would be 0.55. So we want to know exactly if we are pressing the trigger button at all. So that can easily be done here with the calculator. And the calculator go ahead and takes in the signal from L2, and we're plugging that into A. And with the calculator, we're using a function. A lot of people ask what the calculator is for. Well, you can use it to add, subtract, obviously, as well as ask questions. And what is doing logic? Well, doing logic is asking a lot of questions. So basically, we're asking if this number is greater than this number. And since we don't have anything plugged in to B on the inputs on this calculator, and we haven't set a signal here by changing this slider value, we're basically asking if this value is greater than 0, which says if we are pressing down L2 at all, we're going to go ahead and output a full signal, because the result is a true or false statement, and a true or false statement, true would be representative as 1 in binary, and 0 it was false. So 1 is the output if it's true, and 0 is the output if it's false. Okay. Let me just check here. What next? Okay. So now if this is true, we're going to go ahead and send the signal is aiming through a wireless transmitter. And this is basically a cornerstone of logic right here, is sending wireless transmitter. It can basically act like sending a wire over the air and multiple things can be plugged into this wire, basically, from this wireless transmitter. But all we're using it for is to clean up our logic, basically, here. Because if I wanted to, I could delete this and just hook it up to all the places. But this just allows us to cleanly transmit. But you can also use this as a different way of, like, saying if something is true or not. Like, is aiming, for example, is what we're doing it. So if we're holding down L2, we're going to go ahead and send out the is aiming. Then over here, when we're aiming, right here is aiming, we're going to turn on this camera, which changes our view, obviously. Alright, so now we want the player to be able to look around with the sticks if we are aiming. So if we're aiming over here, we're going to turn on this rotator here. Because basically, there's two ways to get the aim, specifically, we get from the right stick. Because we're going to be looking left and right, up and down. So we want to know the direction that we're pushing the stick in. Now, specifically, controller sensors, they have multiple outputs for the sticks. The second page of the sticks are basically camera relative. And what that means is they change the output depending on where you are looking in the scene. And this is useful for a lot of things. For example, moving the puppet, which is why it uses the left stick relative to the camera. But when we're aiming, we only want to know the direction, and we don't want to know the direction relative to the camera. So we're going to go ahead and go to the third page, and we're going to get the right stick local. And sticks have two directions that you could either be pointing in, or two different types of directions, I guess. There's up and down, and left and right. Now left and right is X here, and up and down is Y. Now, I don't know why, I'm pretty sure this is just a preference thing for Medium Molecule, but the local, specifically the local sticks, the Y output is inverted, so that's going to be something that we're going to have to keep in mind for later. But left and right, left is negative value, and right is a positive value. So if we go ahead and open up the rotator settings here, you can see we're changing the speed depending on the output of our left and right from our stick. And we're doing that by changing the blend mode to modulate. That should automatically happen if you hook in this wire, by the way, specifically for rotators. Sometimes it'll do it, sometimes it won't for other gadgets, but it's basically a case-by-case basis. And in this case here, it's going to go ahead and rotate the player left and right. So now that we have that down, and we have the camera, and let's just pretend that the camera is on the player at this point, because that's where it would be when you were first starting. So now the camera would be turning left and right with the player if it was stuck on there. Well, how do we look up and down? Well, we can do that by either animating the camera gadget or making a camera rig. And right here, we have actually made a camera rig, as you can see. But when you're first starting out and building logic stuff, you may just say, okay, well, I can actually just animate with a keyframe here, this camera position by doing this. So that would give us an up look. So when this is active, you'd be looking up. And of course, you'd have another one for looking down, and that would animate the look of the camera for up and down. And how would you control that? Well, you would put it on a timeline. Put your two keyframes on a timeline for looking up and down. And how do you control the timeline? Well, you would manipulate the playhead. So one end would be looking up, and one end would be looking down, basically. And to do that, we can use the speed input of a timer, because timers have a timer output, which outputs a 0 to 1 signal, just like our triggers do. And since we can't really have that with the sticks, because we don't want to aim up and only aim up when we're pressing up. We want it to look up and then stay like it is doing right now. So what we're basically going to do here is we're going to take this timer, I'm going to change the mode to speed. So basically this input, negative means it'll go backwards and positive means it'll go up. And we'll have it at the current time is half, so that way we're looking forward. But with our stick here, our right stick, when we're aiming, so if I go ahead and do this, that will turn on, and then if we look up and down, you can see the timer is getting a signal. And up is negative and down is positive. So with that, you can use this timer output here to control the position of the timeline. So now we could aim up and down and left and right. But here's the next part, because we want to get the spot that we want to grapple to, basically where we're aiming. There's a couple of ways you could do this, but the one thing for sure is that you need to do this easily, you need a camera rig. If you just had this gadget on the player, and you were just animating the gadget, then when you look up and down and left and right, there's nothing that you can really attach to get that position, because you're not really manipulating the position of anything except for a gadget. What you could technically do is, if you used a tag to get the position of where you're looking at, you could animate the position of the tag as well, but that's not what I did here. Instead, I used this, which gives us a couple of ways to do it. But to simplify this, I'm basically asking this laser scope here to give me the position of where it hit to get the exact aim position, and it's going to go ahead and output that position and tell this cube here, hook end, that it is aiming there. So now we have a way to aim, we have the position that we're aiming at, so now we want to know if we are aiming. So for pressing L2 and we press the fire button, which I believe is L1, might be something else, circle, maybe fire, no, it's R2. Okay, so R2, we also have this calculator here. So if we're aiming and we're firing, we're going to go ahead and fire the hook. And that's going to go ahead and right here, put us in a state. Now, a state is basically something to tell if we're doing something or not. So this counter outputs to semi-hooked, which means that we are currently grappling or trying to grapple something. So basically this would be is grappling. So we're currently in a state, and this state can modify a few things. For example, we're using semi-hooked to change our animation to this, and we're also using that to prevent the player from moving, so they can only move from the grappling hook. Now, let's see, what would be next? Well, we want to move this hook, and we're going to animate to the position that we aimed at. Just using that as reference, because it is where we're technically supposed to aim. And in this case here, the way I'm doing it is we're using follower, and when we are hooked or semi-hooked, when we're in this state here, we are going to go ahead and take that position, our aim position, and we want to freeze it because we don't want to change the position of our hook, or we don't want the player to move, and we don't want the position we're aiming at to change, or else the animation might end up a little bit wonky. So what we're going to do is when we are grappling, we're going to go ahead and tell the signal manipulator to freeze. Now, freeze output basically prevents this number from changing. So now we'll have a way to get a position and store it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and follow that position when we are firing. So when we're grappling. And then once we reach that position, we're going to go ahead and send a different signal to hooked if we successfully hooked onto something. And for the sake of this, I'm going to say that you can grapple hook anywhere, pretty much. So we wouldn't want to tell. We just want to know if we have reached that position. So if we reach that position, we're going to go ahead and tell everything else that we are currently hooked. And so when we are hooked, we want to have our second cube here, because this cube allows to have our little cable here for some graphics, as well as provide an animation method on our player that isn't too terrible to actually going towards that spot. So it's going to go ahead, and when you're hooked, we're going to go ahead and follow the hook end. And then when we do find the hook end, like the tag here on the hook end, then we're going to go ahead and detach or grapple finish. And when we detach, we are telling our state up here to reset detach, because we know that we have reached the target. And we also want the player to animate to this hook. So what we do here is, if we are hooked, we're going to go ahead and change our animation pose, and then of course follow our hook start. So that basically covers making a grappling hook, or coming up with the idea of a grappling hook. All that logic, I had planned out pretty much all of this before I actually made it. I had gone through those steps in my head. I understood what I was going to make, and I went out and made it. And sure, there were some bugs or things that I needed to change on the way, but you can always diagnose the problem and come up with a different solution, because Dreams allows a bunch of different solutions. For example, this grappling hook is, I use this right here, a lerp unclamped, and this is a public gadget, and I'm basically changing between the two positions, and that's not entirely efficient logic for Thermo. So I do have a different grappling hook, so I'm gonna go ahead and first of all do this here. I'm gonna go ahead and test this out already to show that this works, because it does. Alright, and now, not entirely sure if I should show this, but I do have, well, I have shown it off on Twitter, but what I'm going to show off is a new grappling hook system that I made specifically for Project Europa. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in our guy here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in this camera here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in a grappling spot, and I'm going to go ahead and make it visible so that we can see it and grapple to it. As you can see, this guy has a lot of different cubes. Oh wait, I think I already have a camera for him. I do. Okay. Well, then I just have to reorient him correctly. There we go. But yeah, I want this grapple spot to be visible. There we go. Thank you. So he has a little bit of a different system. If we go ahead and scope into this guy, we can see that it's kind of similar. It's very similar. It has the same stuff. I don't know if you'll be able to recognize it, but the cubes themselves are a little bit different, or at least the hook end, because you can see here I don't have that lerp gadget. I just have it following the actual hook aim position, and if it sees this block here, then it's going to go ahead and stop in place and allow you to grapple to it. So instead of lerping, we're actually going to go ahead and physically move it with the follower and actually just have it follow it. So you can have a few different methods of doing things, and I'll just go and show that this works. If it does work. I'm not sure what's going on here. Might be using outdated objects or something. Grapple. It might be because it's visible, I think. Maybe if I make a copy of it, make that visible. There we go. And as you can see, you can aim. It's a bit different because it's 2D instead of 3D, but we get grappling. There isn't actual like models done for it yet, so you can't really see that, but you can aim and grapple towards it like so. So there are a bunch of different ways in order to make the same thing, basically. But that was the basics of how to make a grappling hook by going step by step in your head and actually planning out before you begin making something, and basically diagnosing and solving a problem. Now there's one last thing I want to talk about, really, and that is I want to give you guys some homework. I want to give you guys some challenges. I'd like you all to go out and make one of 3 things, and I'm going to go ahead and feature the best of those 3 things in a video on my channel. So I will feature the winner of each on my channel, basically. And so these are the challenges that you can choose from. 1, make an enemy that jumps and runs away with animations when it sees the player. 2, make an enemy that only moves when the player isn't looking at it, and have it kill the player somehow when it's in range and you look at it. 3, make your player have a superpower of any kind, and make it so it can be used against enemies. I hope you all make submissions. I hope you all do your homework, because these videos and my tutorials be kind of pointless if you didn't make anything from them. So I'm giving you homework for the very first time, all of you. I hope you go through with it. But yeah, might as well show off a little preview of the things I've been working on, why I haven't been posting videos as frequently. But that's basically it for this video, so if you don't really care, you can go ahead and stop watching. But I've been working on stuff like this. And it's for my upcoming game, where it's completely randomly generated, and you interact with different civilizations and stuff like that. It has a working title, and you can probably read it already, but let me go ahead and set this up. But yeah, it completely randomly generates the universe, and there's going to be randomly generated, well, not entirely randomly generated, but random AI and different civilizations you can meet, and events that can happen in systems in the universe, or even on your ships that you have. So I hope you all look forward to this as well, because this is going to be amazing. I'm still working on this. It's been consuming a lot of my time, but yeah, I'm not sure how much of this I'm gonna share to the public for Remixable, but yeah, there's that. And, of course, the last thing I'm going to say is I have a Patreon where I share stuff like this. I share my status of this and everything that I'm basically working on in the Discord that I supply to my patrons. And in that Discord, I also have a bunch of cool people already. So, like Faron and Mad VGFX crew, some big name players from the Dreams community. Not too many of those guys, but they're there. So if you want to go ahead and become a patron, get access to this super cool secret Discord server, you can go ahead and do that. Or, you know, just leave a comment, like, and subscribe. That always helps. So, yeah, see you all later. Hope you enjoyed the video. More content is going to be coming soon, including an animation that I have to do sounds for and refine the animations. I already have the rough cut of that done. So, I hope you all enjoyed. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.